William and I scavenged what we could for ammo in the insurrectionist army and surrounding battlefield before we headed out. William was able to find 2 more full sniper magazines, and we both loaded up on as much battle rifle ammo that was left. I only found a few rounds for my shotgun, but I wasn't going to argue. We hopped into the transport Warhog and headed to the city. William was quiet the whole car ride, and I didn't want to say anything. I just let him process everything. The ride wasn't long, maybe 20 minutes before we hit the edge of the city, and we started to see battle damage. It was 10 minutes more, and we were on approach to reach the inner city. As we approached the inner city, we got a transmission from the Asunder. No other Covenant ships had been detected, and Captain Alona was moving the ship to engage. I looked up in the sky and saw the Asunder appear in orbit. Gunfire began to rain down on the Corvette. The Asunder wasn't the fanciest of assault carriers by this point, since Oni had converted it for their own selfish needs, but it could still hold its own if need be. The Corvette's turrets began to fire back, and battle for air superiority began. The Asunder deployed Sabres and Pelicans, thinking the Corvette would deploy Ceres, but strangely it didn't. I was actually surprised the Asunder had Sabres because I had never seen them. Then again, much of the ship we weren't even allowed to see. The Asunder also sent down multiple Pelicans worth of troops to the city, but the UNSC base within the city had not only been holding its own, but pushing the Covenant forces back, trapping the Covenant in a 5-mile radius within the northeastern section of the city. While the battle in the sky was happening, William and I were ordered to take out any remaining ground forces contained within the designated portion of the city.
Hey, it's time to go.
Really?
Yeah, the others are waiting on us.
I thought we had way more time. Shit. Okay, I'll figure out where I left off when we get back. Alright, where did I leave off? Where was I? Oh, that's right, thank you. Going back to the city. We finished off the Covenant forces within the city fairly quickly. They put up little resistance as they seemed more desperate than tactical. The Asunder had crippled the Corvette's engines to the point where it was just floating, but by that time the Corvette had fully moved over the city. If the Asunder were to fire upon it anymore, it was going to crash right into the city. William and I were picked up via Pelican and ordered to get into the Corvette and find a way to move it away from the city. When we were dropped off, at the top of the Corvette, we had Marines and ODSTs backing us up, ready to fight all the way to the bridge. As soon as we were all dropped in the ship, it was eerily quiet. Something wasn't right. William and I looked at each other, and I shook my head no at him. I said,
"It's far too quiet, even for my standards."
William still hadn't said a word by this point, and all he did after looking at me was began to move further into the ship. The ship seemed dead. Like nothing had been even controlling or navigating it. We quickly arrived in the hangar bay and it was in shambles. Crates tossed about, scratches on the wall, and multiple blood streaks leading to different places. When you followed the blood, they led to empty rooms with skeletons of what seemed to be Covey bodies. With no hostiles found in the hangar, we continued to the bridge. As we rushed through the halls, I could feel us being watched. I told Will that I could feel eyes watching me, and he looked back at me, giving me a yes nod. When we reached the doors of the bridge, we laid out a plan. Will would push in first, supported by the ODSTs, then the Marines. I would be last to enter, making sure I kept our flank covered. William approached the door and it opened, with everyone pushing in. First thing William saw was a nearly empty room. As he pushed further, he found a jackal messing with one of the holo panels. He looked back at William, pressed one final button on the holo panel, then William smirked before promptly putting a bullet in his head. The ship began to move towards the city, and an alarm started to blare. I was standing near the door we entered through. I was far enough away that the door was closed, though. Even with the alarm blaring, I could hear something rumbling. As it got closer, I could start to feel it in the floor. I realized at the last second what was happening and threw a grenade at the door. Sure enough, just as the grenade was about to hit the door swung open with dozens of feral coveys bursting through and trying to lunge at me. But the grenade took care of the first set of them. I told the Marines and ODSTs to open fire, and the battle ensued. The ship was falling towards the planet, and we'd stepped right into a trap.
Come on. We're gonna run out of forces by the time we figure that out.
As William was attempting to understand the controls of the Corvette and steer it away from the city, I was defending him. Alongside me, the Marines and ODSTs were giving it their all. This splinter group of the once proud Covenant were far more savage and feral in their fighting, yet still tactical in some of their decisions. We had the main door locked down and the bodies were piling up, but the Coveys were pulling bodies aside and piling them up like they were barriers. They were using their own comrades as meat shields to continue pushing into the bridge. The jackals would attack like they were dogs, getting on all fours and leaping at us, trying to bite and rip whatever they could. The elites were more brutish in their tactics and had an almost starved appearance to them. Their skin become dried up and thinned out. The grunts' bodies looked like they hardened and they had thicker hides. These cubbies were in shambles, and it had become glaringly obvious that they had made a random slip space jump because they were desperate. The evidence was clear, and we were just here to put them out of their misery. William pulled a Marine aside and told her to get on the holo panel parallel to his. He then switched to separate comms, as to not muck up the comms between the other soldiers and I. Him and the Marine got to work pressing a series of symbols, which gave them control to move the Corvette. William pushed and held down one part of the holo panel, and the whole Corvette began to move to the right. This was so sudden that it caused everyone to stumble, even the Coveys still trying to get in. Some of the Coveys slammed against the hallway wall. The bodies that were already piled up shifted too. William was just barely able to pull the Corvette away from a tall building it was on a crash course with. The building was hit on the side by the Corvette, taking out a solid chunk of the roof and upper floor. William was also trying to make sure to pull the Corvette's nose up, but was struggling due to only partial engine functions. By the time the Coveys stopped coming through the door, William had mostly cleared the city and was aiming for a clearing he saw beyond the west side of the city. I looked at where we were headed, and just then another engine blew due to it being under immense stress. William and the Marine tried their best to keep the front of the ship from dipping downward, but it wasn't going to be a pretty landing by any means. We are quickly approaching the ground, and I tell everyone to hold on and brace for impact. Right before the front of the Corvette was going to hit the ground, William pulls the whole ship to the right, instantly drifting the Corvette across the ground. The Corvette's back end took out about a block or so, but it was better than if William hadn't tried anything at all. William the Marine just held on for dear life and let the ship slide across the ground. I closed my eyes and just waited for it to be over, while holding on to a pillar with one arm and keeping an ODST from falling with another. I also activated my magnetic boots to keep me connected to the floor and as stable as possible. You could hear the crunching of metal, explosions, equipment shutting down, some Marines and Coveys screaming, the Covey bodies hitting against other objects, and then silence. I opened my eyes and fully stood up. The whole bridge was in shambles. I could even see outside a bit due to one of the walls being ripped apart. We were basically sideways, and dirt was filling what used to be the floor and one of the walls. I'd say we were sitting at a good 30-degree angle, with me being towards the top of the slope. Still having my magnetic boots activated, I started to make my way down the slope, telling everyone over comms to call out if they were up. I helped the ODST I had with me down the slope, while her 3 comrades all replied, and only one Marine called out saying she was uninjured, which meant 5 of the 6 Marines were unresponsive, and we began to search for them. I called out to William and the Marine that was with him through my helmet speakers, but got no response. ODSTs started to call out that they were finding Marines. I went all the way to the bottom of the bridge towards the dirt and deactivated my magnetic boots. I started to move huge pieces of metal and call out to them again. I moved a crate and found a Marine with a jackal body on top of him. Jackal seemed to have taken most of the blow from the crate, but the Marine was unconscious. I called out for a medic, and an ODST quickly rushed over. I continued to look for and call out to William and the Marine that was with him. As I did, I heard a voice under a huge piece of what used to be a wall. It was the Marine assisting William, and I told her to keep talking, asking if they were okay and asking if she was injured. I deadlifted the piece of wall and then leaned it up against the side of the Corvette. The piece of the wall was bent right in the middle. As I looked down towards the Marine, I saw William hanging over the Marine. He was on all fours, fists and knees pushed into the ground, keeping her covered as best he could. His armor was completely locked up, but the Marine was completely uninjured. I called out to William multiple times with no response. I said,
Why are you always passing out on me?
The Marine crawled out from under William, and I asked her what happened. She said that when they braced for impact, William activated his magnetic boots and made his way over to her. He grabbed her and told her to hold on. He adjusted to take all damage as the ship was being torn apart. He would move her as needed to take the hits from pieces of metal, bodies, crates, whatever was flying towards them. She ended up closing her eyes at one point, and the next thing she saw was William hanging above her and me calling out. As she was telling me what happened, I was trying to get into William's armor systems and deactivate the armor's locking procedure. I finally accessed it after a minute or two, and his suit was telling me that his gel layer was completely locked up, his shielding was unable to recharge, but he was alive. I unlocked his armor, and he completely fell limp. I moved him so that he was sitting up against the floor of the Corvette that was effectively a wall now. I called to the ODSTs, and they said everyone was accounted for. We had still one unconscious Marine, one Marine with a broken arm, and the rest just had minor injuries. I hailed Captain Alona and gave him the full situation report. He acknowledged and said that they had already sent forces our way. We moved all the rubble around to get into better positions, as the Marine with the broken arm was either going to be airlifted out or carried out, as to not damage his arm any further. It only took maybe 5 minutes for us to start hearing the sounds of UNSC vehicles on approach. Warthogs, Pelicans, Falcons. I told the captain later that I thought he sent the whole damn ship after us. Turns out we were going to have to be airlifted out due to the main portion of the hull being too thick to cut through. I used my magnetic boots to help people up to the point where they could attach to the ropes and get lifted out. We used that tear in the wall I mentioned earlier, as it was above us and had torn apart just enough to fit an average human through the hole. William's bulky ass, on the other hand, was a whole other problem. Not only was he bigger than the average person, but he was unconscious, which meant he had his full weight, adding to his armor's weight. Not to mention, I probably can't fit through the hole either. So, I had them drop the full length of the rope and chains they brought, and I attached them to William's armor best I could. I activated my magnetic boots, made my way up the slope, then up to where the hole was, and started prying the metal apart, tossing the pieces back down the slope, making sure to avoid hitting William, but definitely thinking about hitting William. After about good 20 to 30 minutes, with help of Marines cutting away thinner pieces of metal on the other side, we tore apart the gap big enough for William to be lifted out. Even after all of that, he was still knocked out. We got him on the ship, got his armor off, and got him to the medical bay. He was probably asleep for a good hour and a half total. The fucker acts like he does all the work around here or something, I swear. To be fair, he doesn't pass out very often at all. I just like to give him shit about it. Anyway, we did it. We got through it all. And after that long day, we took a bit of a rest for a while, waiting for our next orders. But after William had woken up, the medics cleared him, and we decided to go get some grub. I could tell William seemed to have a lot on his mind, rightfully so. As we were sitting down and eating, he seemed to stare out the window a lot into the vastness of space. I asked him what was on his mind, and he actually started to talk to me about it. All he could think about was how he couldn't save his mom, and even pulled out the picture from his pocket. I told him I felt bad that I wasn't fast enough and didn't see the glimmer of the Elite's camo soon enough. We chatted for a bit about it and talked about how it was okay for him to grieve, about how it was okay that he was feeling those emotions. He didn't have to be a robot anymore. If that's what he wanted to do, if that's how he wanted to continue. Once we were mostly done with our food, I told him to get up and follow me. He was confused at first, but I repeated and reinforced my statement by saying I have a surprise for him. I took him to the recreational area where the Marines, ODSTs, and other staff typically hang out when they have downtime. I led William to a bar that the Marines specifically like to frequent. As we sat in the doorway, I looked around the room, searching for someone. Just when William was in the middle of asking what we were doing there, I pointed to a Marine, sitting at a table towards the back of the establishment. I asked William if he recognized the woman. He said yes. It was the Marine he'd pulled aside to help him on the Corvette. I told him that he saved her life today. I looked around and pointed to another Marine and said, "You saved his life today." Pointed to another and said, "You saved his life," again and another, and saved her life until I pointed out the 5 Marines, plus mentioned the 6th recovering in medbay who survived because of his actions. I told him yes, absolutely grieve. But keep in mind, what he did that day saved the lives of 6 people who had families too. Not to mention the 4 ODSTs as well. I told him it was okay to show emotion, that he could be human. I walked away, and William stayed in that doorway for a few more minutes. He told me later that he made his decision that night to be more than just a robot. More than just the robot Spartans are typically seen as. In fact, he actually walked into that bar and shook the hands of every single Marine he saved and thanked them for their service. It was quite the bold move for him to do off the jump. I'm genuinely proud of him for that. The next week or so, he would go through the stages of grief, but still stayed on task when he had to. By the end of his grieving, he would do something special in honor of his mother. He got his sniper painted blue and gold, with his mother's name laser engraved on both sides right above the trigger. His sniper would become known as Morsa's Touch. And I don't think I've seen William fire anything but a headshot since.
I've seen him miss.